Hey guys, welcome to another Socket A motherboard review. This one is another purple PCB motherboard from ECS. The model is the N2U400-A and it's got an Enforce 2 chipset, the Ultra 400. So looking at the motherboard from a distance, it's got a very clean layout. Of course, the purple PCB is the standout feature. It's very unique. And all the connectors are nicely on the outside. The floppy port here, the IDE ports, the ATX power connector. But we also have a 4-pin 12-volt CPU connector, and we will talk about that one in more detail. This is really one of the highlights of this motherboard. The other highlight of this motherboard is the chipset. This one is from NVIDIA, the Enforce 2 Ultra 400. So the 400 means it's compatible with DDR400 memory, so it supports all the top Athlon XP processors up to the Barton core like the XP3200 Plus, and the Ultra stands for compatibility with dual channel configuration for double the bandwidth. So this is a very fast motherboard, and we will find out in the benchmark soon how it stacks up to the other Socket A motherboards that we reviewed already on the channel. Enforce 2 is a high-end solution, and ECS is more known to do budget boards, so they saved money somewhere, and they saved a bit of money with the Southbridge. So you have a choice between the MCP-T, which is the more expensive option, and the standard MCP. The MCP-T had advanced features such as dual Ethernet, also Firewire, and the Soundforce solution, which could do really cool things such as encode audio into Dolby Digital. So that's where ECS saved a little bit of money. So no Soundforce on this motherboard. We have an audio chip from C-Media, but I usually just use a dedicated Audio G2 or something like that in my projects anyway. Let's have a look at some of the interfaces. AGP8X, 5 PCI slots. Here goes the floppy drive. Here we can connect ATA133 hard drives. So we've got 2 controllers, primary and secondary, and 3 slots for DDR400 memory with a capacity of up to 3 gigabytes, which is extremely impressive. There are only 2 jumpers on this board. The first one is here to clear the CMOS, and these ones have to do with the audio setup of the output ports. At the back we have 2 PS2 ports, 0 parallel, 4 USB ports. They are USB 2.0 compatible as well. We've got an Ethernet port and our audio ports. We have a USB header here at an unusual position. Usually they are down here on the edge of the motherboard. Just behind the PCI slots we've got a connector for digital audio output, so that could be coax or optical, and here you can connect an additional case fan. A second case fan can be connected right here between the IDE ports and the ATX power connector. There's an interesting header here just behind the USB ports. This one is shared with the bottom USB port on the other side, and this is meant to connect a card reader. I got a few comments from you guys about the cooling with the North and South bridge on Enforce 2 motherboards, but we will have a look at power draw results later, and you might find it actually quite surprising. The North bridge doesn't have a fan, and in terms of temperature it was fairly cool to the touch, so it didn't have any issues. The South bridge definitely gets a lot warmer, not hot enough to burn yourself, but that might be a recommendation to install a little passive cooling heatsink onto the South bridge. I think it's time to find out what this motherboard can do. We have our test setup here. It's on our usual test bench with a GeForce 2 GDS with 64 MB of RAM. There's a Promise SATA controller together with an 80 GB SATA hard drive. We're using the same Deepcool 500 watt power supply in all the benchmarks so that the power draw results are comparable. Because this motherboard uses dual channel configuration, we have 2 256 DDR memory modules, so the power draw will be a little bit higher because of that compared to one module, but we will see if that shows up in the power draw results. And the processor is a Athlon XP 1800 Plus with the Palomino core. If it has a BIOS chip, we're gonna flash it. Now this BIOS chip is not removable, so that just means you have to be a little bit careful. On the ECS website we can see the latest version is 1.0E, but the download link didn't work, so I just ran a Google search and got it from elsewhere. Here we're booting up from a boot floppy and flashing to the latest BIOS. Once in the BIOS, I'll load the optimum defaults, and then I'll make a few tweaks like disabling some onboard devices. I don't overclock, but I do spend some time looking at the memory timings, and the memory controller is the highlight of the Enforce 2, so I set the options to turbo. That gave me the best performance. This motherboard can boot from USB, so I booted off my easy to boot USB flash drive to install Windows 98. So let's dive into the benchmark results. We've got expandable first, and the ECS motherboard is at the front with 182 FPS. Moving on to Draken, still in front, 214 FPS. We can see the same thing in Quake 2 in software mode, 97.5 FPS. Switching to OpenGL, 479 FPS. So this motherboard is faster than all the other ones we've reviewed so far. In Quake 3, we're getting 268 FPS. In MDK2, 240. In Serious Sam, we're getting 147. And in Unreal Tournament, 130 FPS. And here we have some power draw results for Quake 2 running in software mode. 104 FPS, so that's quite impressive. So not only does this motherboard outperform all the other boards, it is also more power efficient than at least 3 motherboards in this benchmark roundup. And we're staying with Quake 2, but we're switching to OpenGL to put some load on the video card. 111 watts at the wall, very impressive. So this is the fastest motherboard we tested so far, but looking at the power draw results, it is the lowest. So very efficient, very impressive. So the performance is fantastic. It tops all the charts, so that was very good to see. Next up, I wanted to try the AMD Geode processor. These are low voltage, very efficient CPUs, and it does work. The machine does post, but we get a unknown CPU message. And continuing on to Windows, we're running at around 800 megahertz, so it uses a very low multiplier. And then when I used software to change the multiplier, unfortunately, the machine does lock up. And I tried a few other things, but I believe that this board is just not compatible with the AMD Geode processors. Because this motherboard has a 12-volt CPU pin connector, the incompatibility with the AMD Geode processors is not a big deal. The reason why I always test these low power CPUs is because traditionally socket A motherboards pull most of the power from the 5-volt rail, and modern power supplies have really weak 5-volt rails compared to old power supplies, and that's an issue. For example, if I use a standard socket A motherboard and I put in like a Thunderbird 1400 with a GeForce 3 with this power supply, the machine will not turn on. But this time, not an issue at all. To test this properly, I had a look at the power supplies I have, and I picked the one with the lowest rating at 5 volts. This is a Corsair VS350. So it's got a decent 12-volt rail, 25 amps, but look at that, under the 5-volt rail, only 14 amps with a combined wattage of 90 watts between the 3.3 and 5-volt rail, but not a problem at all. And I even upgraded the machine. I put in an XP 3200 Plus, I put in a X800 Pro video card, 2 slots of RAM, 2 hard drives and everything, and I saw power readings of around 150, 160 watts on the power meter, and it worked fine. So yeah, that's evidence that this motherboard will draw the current from the 12-volt rail, which is awesome. That means you can use any modern power supply without any issues, and you can use any processor and any configuration really, and build an awesome retro gaming PC. So let's summarize what we found. 2 highlights really stand out. The performance is fantastic. So this is the quickest socket A motherboard I've reviewed properly on the channel so far. And secondly, because of the 12-volt 4-pin CPU connector, you can use any modern power supply. So picking such a board with the Enforce 2 chipset and the 4-pin connector can be really fantastic for a good foundation for a retro gaming PC, because you don't have to worry about finding an old power supply that has a beefy 5-volt rail, and that might fail because it's got old components. Yeah, it might just fail due to age. The board is fully compatible with Windows 98. All the drivers are available. So this could be a good foundation for a Windows 98 retro gaming PC. But it's also compatible with Windows XP. And that's something for the next video or future video that I'm working on. I will max out this motherboard with an XP 3200 Plus, 2 GB of RAM, a faster AGP video card, something high powered from ATI, like a Radeon X800 Pro or something like that, and to really see what this machine can do. In general, I believe if you're an AMD fan and you want to build a Windows XP gaming PC, you're better off with an Athlon 64 because the performance ceiling is a lot higher, but you can still build a fairly capable machine using this motherboard. So there you have it, guys. This is a very fast socket A motherboard supporting all the top processors and DDR400 memory in dual channel configuration, and it's got the 4-pin 12-volt CPU connector, which makes it compatible with any modern motherboard. If you have used this motherboard before, let me know in the comments. Also, let me know what you think in general of using such a board for a Windows 98 or Windows XP project. And as always, if you found this video interesting, give it a like, sub to the channel, click on the notification bell, and I shall see you soon with another one.